And like you've said, is the world's number one emitter, and that's because it's got 1.4 billion people. On a per person basis, its CO2 output isn't that high. It's about 38th in the world. The US produces twice as much CO2 per person, as does Australia, as does Canada. It's quite interesting that 3 of the 4 big Anglophone countries produce twice as much CO2 as China, and yet we're not talking about them as the bad guys. Interestingly enough, Canada and Australia, between them, don't have a single kilometre of high-speed rail. Meanwhile, China has 2/3 of all global high-speed rail capacity. And it's going to be doubling that over the next 20 years. The US has less high-speed rail than Uzbekistan. Then you've got the fact that wealthier countries outsource carbon emissions to poorer countries. So China produces about 30% of all manufactured goods worldwide. A manufactured good has these outsourced emissions, which is to say that if an iPhone is produced in China, but it's used by Michael Walker here in London, the CO2 emissions for its production go on the Chinese ledger, not the UK one. About 25% of global CO2 emissions operate in this way. So that actually casts the global north in a better light and countries like China in a worse light. And then you've got other things like reforestation. You know, in the early 1990s, 12% of China was covered by forest. Today it's around 23%. It's looking to get that to 30% by 2050. Then finally, if you look at its actual record on renewable energy, I think this is the icing on the cake. China has more solar capacity than the US and Europe combined. It's world number one in regards to wind capacity. It's increased nuclear capacity by 500% since 2010. It's world number one on hydroelectric capacity. And it's also got huge plans again for the next 10 years. And again, all that really on wind, on solar, on nuclear. All of that is since the 2010s. You know, it didn't lay a single kilometre of high-speed rail until 2007, Michael. And when you look what the Europeans have been doing since 2007, you think of the European debt crisis, etc., how little infrastructure has been built, how little, renewable capacity has really been built. Compare that to what the Chinese are doing. We're nowhere, Michael. Whether it's the Europeans, whether it's the North Americans, whether it's the Australians, the Brits, you really can't compare us to China. Now, that doesn't mean China is saving the world. I'm not saying that. Any economy based upon economic growth with 1.4 billion people like China, which is looking to become much wealthier in the coming decades, is going to massively impact CO2 emissions and levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is going to lead to a warmer planet. But if we're talking about a large country, which is actually making an effort when it comes to climate change, on green energy, on reforestation, on high-speed rail and moving away from aviation, China is far and away ahead of the Western nations. And this is something they will not accept. And so what we'll see at COP over the next couple of weeks is Sinophobia. And that rests upon ignorance with Western audiences to basically think, well, the Chinese, they're stupid, they're not white, they're not the West, they're burning coal. They burn a huge amount of coal, but it's also 1.4 billion people. And the new coal power stations that China is going to build and there's dozens of power stations that are going to be built with coal, dozens. But again, it's 1.4 billion people, Michael. It's 3 times the population of the European Union. It's only going to add 1.5% to China's extant carbon emissions. So the numbers we're talking about here are huge. You know, every year between now and 2025, they're looking to reforest the surface area the size of Belgium. So a bit of nuance is required. And actually, when you really get beneath the sort of fog perpetuated by Western press, who are being very hostile to Beijing, I think, for geopolitical reasons, then, like I say, it's pretty clear where leadership is, if it's anywhere. It's not Washington, it's not Brussels, it's not London, it's Beijing.